Okay, now we are going to go over a fractions review. So you should all already know these things, but this will be a refresher so that we know what a fraction is and how to use operations involving fractions. So first of all, you should know the top is called the numerator and the bottom is called the denominator. An improper fraction is going to be written as A over B, where A must be greater than B. A mixed number is going to be written as a whole number A and then the fraction B over C. And for this, A must be an integer and B must be less than C. And on your paper, I want you to make sure that you are writing an example. So give me an example on your paper of an improper fraction and of a mixed number. We have said a few different times in class already, when we are adding and subtracting fractions, we must have a common denominator. All right, so some examples. In this first example here, we are adding fractions. We already have that common denominator, so I know I'm just going to add the numerators, and the denominator is going to stay the same. And then same when I am subtracting. I already have that common denominator, so I'm just going to subtract 7 minus 5, and I get 2 over 8. Now, this will not be my final answer. We always want to write our fraction answers in simplest form. So for this one, I can divide both the top and the bottom by 2, and I can simplify my answer to 1 over 4. Now, in this third example, when we are adding fractions with unlike denominators, we have to do something to be able to get that common denominator. So here we should be able to see that my common denominator is going to be 8 because I can multiply 2 times 4 to get 8. But as soon as I multiply that denominator by 4, I have to make sure I also multiply the numerator by 4 as well. We already talked about, just like in an equation, what I do to one side I must do to the other. When I am working with fractions, I don't want to change the actual value of the fraction. So I need to make sure that if I multiply the bottom by something, I also multiply the top by that same number. So I end up with 4 over 8 plus 3 over 8. Now I have that common denominator, so now I can add the top, add the numerator, and leave my denominator the same. So I get an answer of 7/8. That is completely simplified. So then if we move on to the fourth example, now I'm not just going to be able to multiply one fraction by another. I'm going to have to find that common denominator. And so here we can see with my denominators being 7 and 5, the common denominator is going to have to be 35. 35 is the least common multiple of 7 and 5. So I'm going to use that as my common denominator. Now I can see that I have to multiply 7 times 5 to get to 35. So I must also multiply the numerator by 5. In my second fraction here, I have to multiply 5 times 7 to get to 35. So then I must also multiply that numerator by 7. And I get 21 over 35. So now, again, I'm just going to subtract my numerators, and I get 9, and then my denominator stays the same. So my answer is 9 over 35, or 9/35. Now, your job will be to complete both of those practice problems. So you can either pause the video and do those now, or you can do all of the practice problems at the end of the video. So that will cover adding and subtracting fractions. And now we are going to move on to multiplying fractions. So when we multiply fractions, I have A over B, and I am going to multiply that by a fraction B over C. And when I multiply, I just want to multiply straight across. So I'm going to multiply numerator by numerator and denominator by denominator. So in my numerator, I'm going to have A times B, and in my denominator, I'm going to have B times C. Now, once I'm looking at this multiplication, I want to see, is there anything that I can simplify here? And I should know that B divided by B is the same as 1 over 1. That can simplify. So I'm left with a final answer of A over C. So we need to remember to simplify before we multiply out. That will make this a lot easier. So here in my first example, again, I'm going to multiply straight across. So I'm going to multiply 1 times 5 in the numerator, and then I'm going to multiply 3 times 6 in the denominator. And now there's nothing that I can simplify here, so I am going to have an answer of 5 over 18. I'm simply just going to multiply the numerator and multiply the denominator to get my answer. In this next problem, I can write 5 as a fraction by writing the fraction 5 over 1. So anytime I have a whole number, I can put it over 1 to write it as a fraction. So now I'm going to multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators. So I have 5 times 4 over 1 times 5. And now I can see here I can do some simplifying in this problem before I actually multiply things out. So I can simplify 5 over 5 to 1 over 1, just like I did in that first example problem up at the top. So now I have 1 times 4 is 4 over 1 times 1, which is 1. Now I can also simplify 4 over 1 is the same as 4. So my final answer to this problem is 4. In this third example here, I am going to follow the same process. So multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators, and I get 7 times 20 divided by 10 times 21. Now, again, before I do this multiplication, these are very large numbers. I don't need my calculator to do this if I remember to simplify first. So the first thing, I can't simplify 7 over 10, but 7 over 21, I can simplify to 1 over 3. I can divide both of those by 7. They have a common factor. 7 divided by 7 is 1. 21 divided by 7 is 3. So 7 over 21 simplifies to 1 over 3. Now, looking at this 20 over 10, I can also simplify that to 2 over 1. 20 divided by 10 is the same as 2 over 1. They have a common factor of 10. Now when I do my multiplication, I'm taking 1 times 2, which is 2, and 1 times 3, which is 3. So I end up with a much simpler multiplication problem if I just simplify before I multiply. So remember to do that when we are multiplying fractions. All right, so we've covered adding and subtracting, we've covered multiplying. Next on our list is going to be dividing fractions. And when we divide fractions, this is the same as multiplying by its reciprocal. And we can also see that in our book. We will take a look at more of why this works tomorrow in class. But when we divide by a fraction, we multiply by its reciprocal. What that means is when I see a division sign and I'm dealing with fractions, I'm going to multiply and flip the second fraction. Make sure that we're multiplying by the reciprocal of the second fraction. That's the only one that's going to change. So when I see this problem here, 1/2 divided by 2/3, my first fraction doesn't change at all. I leave that as 1/2. But now instead of dividing by 2/3, I want to multiply by the reciprocal of 2/3, which means I'm simply going to flip that fraction upside down. So I'm going to multiply by the fraction 3/2. Now, before I multiply out, I want to take a look, is there anything that can be simplified? 1/2 is as simple as possible. 3/2 is as simple as possible. So I'm going to multiply straight across. 1 times 3 is 3. 2 times 2 is 4. So my answer to this problem ends up being 3/4. The next problem, again, I want to remember that I can write this whole number 5 as the fraction 5/1. So now I'm going to take the fraction 25/26 and I am going to multiply it by the reciprocal of 5/1. So when I talk about reciprocal, I'm going to flip the fraction over. So I'm going to multiply by 1/5. Now, before I multiply this out, I want to see, is there anything that I can simplify first? So 25/5, I can simplify to 5/1. They have a common factor of 5, so I can simplify. Now when I multiply out, I'm going to take 5 times 1, which gives me 5, and 26 times 1, which is going to give me 26. So by simplifying before I multiply that out, I don't have to multiply 26 times 5, I just have to multiply 26 times 1. Don't need my calculator for that. I can do that in my head. So I get a final answer of 5/26. So that takes care of dividing fractions. It's just multiplying. If we know how to multiply fractions, we can easily divide fractions as well. So now we have covered all of the operations with fractions. So now we want to talk about doing these operations with mixed numbers. And when we are dealing with mixed numbers, what I want you to always do is change that mixed number to an improper fraction. This will make these much easier to work with as we are doing these problems. So in order to change a mixed number to a fraction, I'm going to take the denominator and I'm going to multiply it by the whole number and then add the numerator. So 3 times 4 is 12, plus 2 is 14. So my numerator will be 14. My denominator does not change. That's going to stay as 3. Then I'm going to subtract, and I'm going to do the same thing to the second fraction. I'm going to take 3 times 3 and then add 1. So 3 times 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10. So now I get the fraction 10/3. So now, because I have a common denominator, I don't have to change the denominator at all. It's already the same. So I simply subtract my numerators, leave my denominator the same, and I get an answer of 4/3. Now, if you want to change this improper fraction to a mixed number, you can leave your answer just like this. For right now, this is an okay answer, but we can also change that back to a mixed number. So if we think about how many whole times does 3 go into 4? Well, 1 time. And then I know that 3 times 1 is 3, so then I just have 1/3 left over. We can always check our answer by doing 3 times 1 plus 1. So 3 plus 1 is 4, and our answer does check out. So you can either write your answer as 4/3, or you can write your answer as 1 and 1/3. Either answer is correct, and I will accept either one. Now looking at this second example, again, now we have a division problem, but we are working with mixed numbers. So again, I'm going to change this to an improper fraction. 5 times 3 is 15, plus 2 is 17. Make that a little more clear. So 17 over 5 divided by 10 times 2 is 20, plus 1 is 21 over 10. Now, we are dealing with a division of fractions problem. So anytime I'm trying to divide by a fraction, I want to multiply by its reciprocal. So I'm going to take 17 fifths and multiply it by 10 over 21. Now I am multiplying, so I want to see, is there anything that I can simplify before I multiply? So 17 over 21 does not simplify, but 10 over 5 simplifies to 2 over 1. So now that I've simplified, I can multiply. 17 times 2 is 34. 1 times 21 is 21. Now, if I want to change that and write it as a mixed number, I want to think how many whole times does 21 go into 34, and that would be 1. And then I am left over with 13 out of 21. We can also use long division to do this. If I tried to do long division with 34 and 21, my answer would be 1 remainder 13. So we can use long division to show us how to change an improper fraction into a mixed number. But I would accept either answer for this second example. Now again, for each of these sections, you have some practice problems that you need to be doing on your own. So that will be part of what I will be checking tomorrow when you walk into class. You need to make sure that the notes are filled out and that you have done the practice problems as well. Now, we are going to take a look at proportions. And we talked about a proportion is two equal ratios or two equal fractions. So I need to remember that with a proportion, I always have an equal sign. And as soon as I see that equal sign between two fractions, I know that I can cross multiply to solve this proportion. So I'm going to take A times D and then C times B. So I have A times D equals, I still have that equal sign there, B times C. So I cross multiply numerator times denominator equals numerator times denominator, and I end up with AD equals BC. So that is how I would solve a proportion. This completes your fractions review. So again, you should have seen all of this before, but this is just a quick refresher over all of the operations that deal with fractions. So again, you do have some practice problems that you need to be completing on your own as part of your homework. My suggestion is, just like I did not use a calculator with the examples, I would not use a calculator with these practice problems because you will be taking a no calculator fractions quiz. And all of the problems I give you will not require a calculator. It will be just as simple math as everything that we have done on this worksheet. So as you are working, you can check your answer with a calculator, but I would not use a calculator to give you the answer because you need to know how to work with fractions without just relying on your calculator all the time. Good luck.